At my dad's retirement party, my brother pointed at the gate and said, "Get out. This family's better off without you." My mom nodded like I'd already been erased. I walked to my car, made one quiet call, and by the next afternoon, they knew what cutting me off had really cost them. My brother pointed at the gate and said, "Get out. This family's better off without you." He said it loud enough for 40 people to hear, loud enough for the DJ to catch it over the speakers, loud enough for my mother to hear from her folding chair 6 feet away, where she'd been sitting with a paper plate on her knee and a glass of wine she'd been nursing for an hour. She looked at me, and instead of standing up, instead of saying one word, she nodded. A small, tired nod, like she'd already made this decision a long time ago and was just now getting around to showing it. The nod was worse than the words. The words came from Logan. The nod came from the person who was supposed to be the counterweight. My father was standing near the gift table, reading a card someone had handed him. He didn't look up. Not once. He held the card at chest level and kept reading it like the most important thing happening at his retirement party was a Hallmark message from a coworker. I was halfway to the gate when I stopped. Not because I was hurt, because I remembered that I'd signed the check for everything in that yard. The food they were eating, the music they were dancing to, the decorations on every table, the photographer, the rented speakers, the folding chairs they were sitting in. Every dollar came through me. Every vendor had my number. Every contract had my name on it. I turned around, walked past my brother without looking at him, and found the venue manager standing near the bar with a clipboard in his hand. "How fast can you clear this out?" I asked. He looked at the contract on his clipboard. "You're the one who booked it, right?" "That's right. 30 minutes. Make it 20. The venue manager, a guy named Darren who I'd worked with twice before, didn't ask me why. He'd been doing events for 15 years, and he knew what a client's face looked like when the client was done. He turned around, spoke into his radio, and within 2 minutes, the staff started moving. Tables cleared first, then the chairs got folded, then the decorative lighting started coming down. My brother was still standing by the gate with his arm out, watching the setup crew walk past him carrying folding chairs like he wasn't there. I walked to the catering station where Mona Chun was supervising her crew. Mona had catered my parents' anniversary dinner 2 years ago and a work event for me last fall. She was professional, fast, and she didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Mona, I need you to stop serving and start packing." She looked at me, then at the yard where people were still holding plates and drinks. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She nodded and gave the signal to her crew. Trays came off the buffet table. Chafing dishes got lids. The serving line shut down in under 3 minutes. My brother saw the food disappearing and walked over with that chest-out walk he'd inherited from our father, the walk of a man who expects rooms to rearrange around him. "What the hell are you doing?" he said to Mona, reaching for a tray her assistant was carrying. "Put that back. The party's not over." Mona looked at him, then at me, then back at him. "The person who paid me just told me to stop. You're welcome to hire your own caterer." She said it at normal volume, but 3 guests standing near the buffet heard every word. One of them, a woman from my father's office, set her plate down on the table and stepped back like she'd just realized she was standing in someone else's argument. My brother's hand was still in the air, reaching for a tray that was already being loaded into the van. He didn't know what to do with the hand, so he just lowered it slowly and stood there. The DJ was next. He'd been hired through me, paid through me, and when Darren told him to wrap up, he didn't hesitate. He faded out the Motown track my father had been enjoying, the one with the horns and the bass line that had been making people nod along even though nobody was actually dancing to it. The fade was smooth and professional, and for about 3 seconds the guests probably thought it was just a transition between songs. Then the DJ unplugged his laptop and started wrapping cables around his forearm in neat loops, and the silence that replaced the music wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the kind of silence where people suddenly become aware of how loud their own conversations sound and start lowering their voices without knowing why. A few guests looked toward the speaker setup. One of them, a man I didn't recognize, turned to the woman next to him and said, "Is everything okay?" She shrugged. Then they both watched the DJ carry a speaker toward the parking lot, and the shrug turned into something closer to concern. My mother was still in her folding chair at this point, but she'd stopped sitting back. She was on the edge of the seat now, her purse on her lap, watching the equipment disappear piece by piece with the expression of someone watching water rise in a basement and not knowing where the valve is. At 7:42, Darren cut the decorative string lights. The ones I'd specifically ordered because my father once mentioned he liked the look of those warm bulbs people hang in their backyards in the summer. I'd remembered that, the way I remembered most things about my family that they never remembered about me, and I'd ordered the lights and had them strung across the yard the morning of the party while Logan was still asleep. Now they went dark, and the yard went from a party to a dim rectangle of grass with folding chairs stacked against the fence and confused people holding empty cups under a sky that was starting to turn purple. My mother had finally stood up from her chair, but she hadn't moved from the spot. She was standing exactly where she'd been sitting, her purse clutched against her stomach, watching the caterer's van pull out of the driveway with its brake lights blinking red at the end of the street. My brother was in the middle of the yard, beer still in his hand. The six-pack he'd brought, 2 hours late, was sitting on the one table they hadn't cleared yet because it wasn't part of the rental contract. It was my parents' own patio table, and that six-pack was Logan's entire contribution to a party that cost $6,800. He was looking around the empty space the way you look around a room after the power goes out, waiting for something to come back on, not yet understanding that nobody was going to flip the switch. I didn't stay to watch. I was already in my car by the time the last guest walked through the gate that my brother had pointed at 20 minutes earlier when he told me to leave. I became the family's fixer by accident about 7 years ago, the Thanksgiving my mother tried to host at the house, and everything went wrong at once. The turkey was still frozen at noon because nobody had thought to thaw it the night before. The oven was making a sound that turned out to be a failing heating element. 2 relatives were driving in from out of state, and nobody had confirmed whether they were actually coming. My brother Logan was on the couch watching football with a beer balanced on his knee, and my father was in the garage organizing tools he'd already organized twice that month. I made 6 phone calls in 40 minutes. Found a restaurant that could do a last-minute catering order for 14 people, called a repair service for the oven so it would be working by Christmas, confirmed with both relatives that they were coming and which highway to take, and set up the dining room myself because nobody else had started. Dinner happened. Everyone ate. My mother hugged Logan when he came to the table and said, "See, it all worked out." She said it while looking at him, not at me, like the food had arrived by some pleasant coincidence that didn't require anyone to be thanked. After that, every family event went through me. Not because anyone asked, because nobody else would do it, and I couldn't stand watching things fall apart. Logan figured out fast that he could show up late with a bottle of wine, give a toast, and get thanked for the evening. So that's what he did. Every time. 6 months before the retirement party, at a family dinner, Logan made a joke while passing the bread that landed differently than he probably intended. He said, "Pass it to the help," and pointed at me with his chin. 3 people at the table heard it. My mother heard it. She changed the subject to the weather, and later that night she called me and said, "He's just joking, Jake. You know how your brother is. He doesn't mean it like that." I didn't say anything. That was the last time I ate at the family table before the retirement party. Back at the party, or what was left of it. I heard about this from Gus Walsh, my father's oldest friend from work, who stayed until the end because Gus is the kind of man who doesn't leave a room until he understands what happened in it. Logan tried to call Mona back within 10 minutes of the shutdown. He scrolled through his phone contacts, through his recent calls, through his text messages. He didn't have Mona's number because he'd never had Mona's number, because he'd never needed Mona's number, because the person who had Mona's number was the person he'd just told to get out. He tried the venue manager next. Darren told him the contract was closed, and any changes had to come from the account holder. Logan said, "I'm the account holder's brother." Darren said, "That's not how contracts work, sir." My mother tried to keep the remaining guests comfortable. She went inside and came back with a bag of tortilla chips and a jar of salsa from the pantry, which she set on the one remaining table next to Logan's six-pack. Tortilla chips and salsa at a retirement party that had, 30 minutes ago, featured a full catered buffet with a carving station and 3 sides. 2 of my father's co-workers looked at the chips, and then at each other, and then made their excuses and left. One of them, a woman named Carol who had worked with my father for 12 years, shook his hand on the way out and said, "Interesting evening, Ray." That was the word. Interesting. The kind of word people use when the real word would be too uncomfortable to say out loud. Within 20 minutes, the yard was empty except for my parents, my brother, and 6 folding chairs the venue crew had missed. Logan was pacing the length of the fence, phone in hand, calling numbers that didn't pick up. My mother was picking up napkins from the grass, one by one, bending down and standing up and bending down again, like cleaning the yard could somehow clean up what had happened in it. My father was sitting in one of the remaining chairs with the gift card still in his hand, reading it or pretending to read it or just holding it because he didn't know what else to hold. My mother called me that night around 11:30. I didn't answer, but seeing her name on the screen brought back a specific memory from 2 years ago that I'd been carrying around like a stone in a coat pocket. Always there, always heavy, never looked at directly until now. It was a Saturday evening after my parents' anniversary dinner, the one I'd spent 3 weeks planning. I'd found the restaurant through a colleague's recommendation, tested the menu with Mona a week before, and printed invitations on heavy cardstock because my mother once mentioned she liked invitations you could feel the weight of. I coordinated the guest list, confirmed dietary restrictions with every attendee, and arranged the flowers through a shop on the east side that did centerpieces at half the usual price. At the dinner, Logan stood up and gave a toast. He thanked everyone who made tonight possible. He said it with his glass raised and his voice carrying across the room in that way his voice always carries, big and warm and perfectly timed. I wasn't in the room when he said it. I was in the kitchen standing next to the pastry chef, confirming that the dessert was the lemon tart my mother preferred and not the chocolate mousse the restaurant had tried to substitute at the last minute. I heard the toast through the kitchen door. I heard the applause. I heard my mother say, "Oh, Logan." 2 days later, I told my mother what had happened. I kept my voice calm and said it the way you'd report a fact, not lodge a complaint. Logan is telling people he organized the anniversary dinner. He didn't. I did. All of it. The venue, the menu, the flowers, the guest list. She looked at me with the face she makes when she's about to manage something instead of address it. You know how your brother is, Jake. Don't make it a thing. You're both contributing in your own way. Logan's good at the social part. You're good at the practical part. She split the labor perfectly. She just forgot to split the recognition. And the message underneath the split was clear. Logan gets to be seen. You get to be useful. Questioning that arrangement is the same as causing trouble. That was the night I understood that my mother hadn't been caught in the middle of anything. She'd chosen a side years ago, and the side she chose was the one that needed her more. Logan needed her approval, her defense, her constant management. I didn't need any of that. And because I didn't need it, she decided I didn't deserve it either. She called it being my reliable one, which sounded like a compliment until you realized it meant the same thing as the one I don't have to worry about, which meant the same thing as the one I'm not going to. I got home around 8:30. I made a sandwich, turkey and mustard on wheat, and I sat at the kitchen table and ate it while my phone sat face up on the counter across the room. The screen lit up every few minutes with a name I didn't feel like seeing. Logan called twice. My mother called 3 times. My father didn't call at all, which was the least surprising thing about the entire evening. He'd spent 30 years practicing the art of not being the one who picks up the phone, and tonight was no exception. I washed my plate, dried it, put it back in the cabinet in the same spot it always goes. I wiped down the counter. I turned off the kitchen light. The apartment was quiet in the way it always is, which is the kind of quiet that used to bother me and now felt like something I'd earned. I went to bed around 10. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel righteous. I felt the way you feel when you finally set down something you've been carrying for so long that your arms forgot what empty felt like. Not good. Not bad. Just lighter. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Logan. I read it without picking up the phone. 7:14 a.m. tomorrow would bring. I was out of line last night. Can we talk? But right now, at midnight, the text said, that was completely unnecessary. You embarrassed Dad in front of his friends. I stared at the ceiling and thought about something that happened at my father's 60th birthday 3 years ago. I'd organized the entire party, same as always. Booked the restaurant, coordinated the guest list with my mother, ordered a custom cake with a photo of my father's old work crew printed on the frosting because I thought it would mean something to him to see those faces one more time. I'd also put together the retirement gift, a framed photo collage of Ray's 30 years, spending 2 weekends collecting photos from his co-workers through emails and phone calls and one in-person visit to a retired foreman who didn't use email. At the 60th birthday party, a cousin came up to Logan and said, "This is really nice, Logan. You did a great job putting this together." Logan was holding a glass of wine, and wearing a shirt I'm fairly sure he'd put on 15 minutes before arriving. He said, "Thanks." It took a while to get everything right. He said it without blinking, without looking in my direction, without a half-second of hesitation that might suggest he was aware another person in the room had done every single thing he was taking credit for. He just absorbed it the way he absorbs everything, casually, completely, and without the smallest trace of discomfort. That wasn't carelessness. That was a system. He'd been building his reputation as the family's organizer on my labor for years, and he'd gotten so comfortable inside that lie that it had stopped feeling like a lie to him. It was just the way things were. He was the one who made things happen, and I was the one who actually made things happen, and nobody in the family could see the difference because Logan made sure they didn't have to. The next morning, my phone had 11 missed calls and one voicemail I hadn't listened to yet. Logan's text at 7:14 said what I expected. "I was out of line last night. Can we talk?" By 11:30, he'd sent a second one. "Come on, man." It was a party. Things got heated. The shift from apology to minimization in 4 hours told me everything about how genuine the first message was. Meanwhile, Logan was trying to fix things. He called the venue to ask about rebooking for a replacement retirement dinner, something he could throw together to prove the family was fine, to prove he could handle it, to prove the night before was a glitch and not a structural collapse. Darren told him the deposit was in Jake Porter's name and couldn't be discussed with anyone else. Logan hung up and called 2 restaurants for catering quotes. The first one asked how many guests, what kind of menu, whether he needed waitstaff or buffet-style service, and whether there were dietary restrictions. Logan didn't know the answer to any of those questions because he'd never been the person who knew those answers. The quote came back at $3,800 for 40 people. He hung up without responding. He tried a second restaurant for $1,100, not including setup or breakdown. He hung up again. He opened his phone and started scrolling through his contacts looking for someone who might know a cheaper option, and he realized for the first time in his life that he didn't know a single person in the catering industry because every connection in that world belonged to me. He tried to put together a guest list from memory and got to about 15 names before he ran out, because the other 25 had been invited through my email using a contact list I'd built over 4 years of organizing events for a family that thought the invitations sent themselves. The replacement party never happened. Not because anyone stopped it. Not because Logan decided against it. Because Logan genuinely could not do what I'd been doing for 7 years. The thing he'd been claiming credit for was a machine he'd never once operated, and now that the operator was gone, the machine just sat there, and Logan just sat there next to it, holding a notepad with 3 crossed-out phone numbers and nothing else on it. Gus Walsh called my father the next afternoon. I found out about this later through Gus himself, who told me the story at a coffee shop 3 weeks after the retirement party. He told it the same way he tells everything, direct and without softening the edges. Gus had worked with Ray for 28 years. They'd started at the same warehouse in their late 20s, climbed the same ladder, survived the same rounds of layoffs, retired within a year of each other. Gus was the kind of friend who didn't believe in diplomacy when the truth was more useful. "Ray, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it." "Go ahead. I've known you almost 30 years. I was at your retirement party last night. I watched your son get thrown out by your other son, and you stood there reading a gift card like it was happening on television. You didn't say a word. You didn't move. Your wife nodded along like it was a plan you'd all agreed on beforehand. And now 2 people from the office have called me this morning asking what happened at your party, and I don't know what to tell them because I still don't fully understand it myself." My father was quiet for a long time. Gus told me he could hear the kitchen clock ticking through the phone, which meant the house was otherwise completely silent, which meant my mother was either not home or not speaking. "I didn't know what to do," my father finally said. "That's the problem, Ray. You never do. And the kid who always knew what to do, the one who put that whole party together, who hired the caterer and booked the venue and made your retirement look like something worth celebrating, that kid just walked out of your life. And you let him go because standing up would have meant choosing a side. And you've spent your whole life avoiding that. Logan was out of line. I know that. Logan's been out of line for years, Ray. Everyone in your family knows it except the 2 people who were supposed to do something about it. And the one person who actually did something about it is the one you let walk out the gate." Gus hung up after that. He told me he didn't call back the following week or the week after that. Their 28-year friendship didn't end with a fight. It just got quieter in the way things get quiet when respect leaves a room and nobody notices it leaving until the room feels different. My mother tried calling me every day that week. I didn't answer. On Wednesday, she left a voicemail that started with, "I know you're upset," and ended with, "You know how your brother is." The same phrase. The same playbook. Even now, with the evidence of what that playbook had produced sitting in the form of a canceled party and a fractured family, she reached for the same tool because it was the only one she'd ever learned to use. Logan's texts kept coming, and each one peeled back another layer of who he actually was when things weren't going his way. Day 1, 7:14 a.m. I was out of line. "Can we talk?" Day 1, 11:30 a.m. "Come on." Things got heated. Day 2, "This is ridiculous. You're blowing this way out of proportion." Day 3, "Mom's a wreck. Are you happy now?" Day 4, "Nothing." Radio silence. He'd run through every tactic he had and none of them had gotten a response, so he stopped, the way a vending machine stops when you run out of coins. On Friday, my mother left a different voicemail. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the management tone she usually carried. "Jake, I'm not calling to defend your brother. I'm calling because I tried to put together a Sunday dinner this week. Just a simple dinner. Nothing big. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't get the timing right. I burned the chicken because I forgot what temperature you always set the oven to. Your aunt didn't come because I forgot to confirm with her, and I didn't realize until I was setting her plate that nobody had called her. I sat in the kitchen afterward, and I looked at the empty chairs, and I thought about all the times you made it look easy. All the holidays and the birthdays and the dinners that just happened because you were there making them happen, and I never once said thank you. Not once in 7 years." She paused for a few seconds, and I could hear her breathing. The kind of breathing you do when your throat is tight and you're trying to keep your voice steady enough to finish what you're saying. "I was trying to keep peace, Jake. That's all I ever did. I just kept the peace." The voicemail ended. I listened to it once. She was right that she'd been trying to keep peace. She'd been trying to keep it for 20 years. And the way she kept it was by telling me to absorb things and telling Logan he could do whatever he wanted and calling that arrangement balance. That's not peace. That's a hierarchy with a softer name. The failed dinner sat with me longer than I expected. Not because it changed anything. Because the image of my mother sitting alone in a kitchen with burned chicken and an empty chair where my aunt should have been was the clearest picture I'd ever seen of what my absence actually meant. Not to me. To them. I'd always known what I did for the family. They were just finding out. My father called me for the first time in years on Saturday afternoon, 6 days after the party. I know it was the first time because I checked my call history and scrolled back through months of contacts, and his name wasn't there. Not once. Not a birthday call. Not a holiday check-in. Not a "how are you doing" on a Sunday. The phone had been ringing in one direction my whole life, and it had always been me calling them or them calling me because they needed something done. The voicemail was 31 seconds long. I know because I looked at the timestamp 3 times. The first 29 seconds were silence. Not the silence of a man thinking about what to say. Not the silence of someone searching for the right opening line. This was the silence of a man who picked up the phone, heard the voicemail greeting, opened his mouth, and discovered there was nothing inside it that was adequate for the situation. 29 seconds of a 64-year-old man standing in his kitchen with the phone against his ear and nothing coming out. The same way he'd stood at the gift table with a card in his hand and nothing coming out while his son was being thrown out of a party 10 feet away. At the 30-second mark, 2 words. "Call me." I listened to it twice. I didn't call back. A week and a half after the party, on a Thursday evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table going through work emails when I picked up my phone and opened a new text. I typed 5 words to Logan, Saturday. Brennan's Diner. 11 a.m. He replied in under a minute, which told me he'd been checking his phone constantly for days waiting for exactly this kind of message. I told him to bring our parents. He said okay. He didn't ask what the meeting was about, probably because he already knew, or because he was afraid that asking would give me a reason to cancel it. I got there 10 minutes early and sat in a booth near the back with a clear view of the door. Ordered a coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug. The diner was the kind of place that hasn't been remodeled since the 90s. With vinyl booths and a counter with stools and a waitress who called everyone Han. I'd been here once or twice for work lunches. It smelled like pancake batter and burned coffee, and it was the most neutral ground I could think of. They came in together at 11:02. Logan first, scanning the room the way he scans every room, looking for the spot where he can position himself at the center. Then my mother, eyes red, purse held against her body. Then my father, last, walking with his shoulders slightly forward, looking at the floor. He sat down without making eye contact with anyone at the table, the same way he'd stood at the gift table without making eye contact with anyone in the yard. Logan started talking before the waitress even came over. Look, I know things got out of hand at the party. I said something I shouldn't have said, and I'm sorry. Can we just move past this and get back to normal? I let him finish. The waitress came. I told her we were fine. She left. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, set it down slowly. Who booked the venue for Dad's retirement party? Logan blinked. What? The venue. Darren's place on Oak Street. Who called him? Who signed the contract? Who put down the deposit? He didn't answer. His mouth opened slightly, the way it does when he's about to say something, and then it closed because there was nothing to say. Who hired the caterer? I asked. Same tone. Same volume. No anger in it at all. Just a question, the way you'd ask someone to confirm an address. My mother shifted in her seat and her hand moved toward the napkin dispenser. Not to get a napkin, just to touch something, to have something to do with her fingers. My father was looking at the salt shaker the same way he'd been looking at the gift card. Mona Chun, I said when nobody spoke. I hired her. I picked the menu. I approved the head count and paid the invoice 3 weeks before the party. For $1,200. You brought a six-pack 2 hours late and told people you had it handled. The silence at the table was heavy enough to press on your chest. The waitress walked past with a pot of coffee and didn't stop because she could read the table the same way Darren could read a client's face. I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Just closer. What did you do, Logan? He stared at me. His jaw worked like he was trying to form a word that wouldn't come. For 7 years. Every holiday, every birthday, every anniversary, every family event. The venues, the caterers, the guest lists, the invitations, the gifts. Dad's retirement photo collage that you handed to him and said was from the family. You didn't even know what was inside the wrapping. So I'm asking you, at this table, right now, what did you actually do? He couldn't answer. Not because he was being stubborn or strategic. Because the answer was nothing, and saying nothing out loud in front of his parents at a diner on a Saturday morning was something his mouth physically could not produce. His chin moved like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down, and then he just stopped trying. I looked at my mother. She was crying without sound, the way she always does, as if even her grief was designed not to make anyone in the room uncomfortable. I was trying to keep peace, she whispered. I didn't answer right away. I let the sentence sit in the air between us for a few seconds, long enough for her to hear it the way I'd been hearing it for 20 years. You weren't keeping peace, Mom. You were keeping Logan comfortable and calling it the same thing. Those are 2 different jobs. One of them cost me 7 years. She closed her eyes. Her whole body seemed to fold inward, shoulders dropping, chin dipping toward her chest, like someone had pulled a thread that held her upright and let it go. My father, for the first time since sitting down, looked up from the salt shaker. He looked at me, just for a second. His eyes were red and wet, and they held mine for about 2 heartbeats before they dropped back down to the table. That was it. 2 heartbeats of contact from a man who had spent his entire life avoiding exactly this kind of moment. It was the most he'd given me in years, and it still wasn't enough, and we both knew it. I stood up. I put a $10 bill on the table for my coffee. I didn't leave, Logan. You lost me. I walked out of the diner without looking behind me. The bell above the door rang once when I pushed it open, and then I was in the parking lot and in my car, and the radio was on before I'd even pulled out of the space. 3 weeks later, I was at a community center on the east side of the city helping set up a fundraiser for a youth sports league that a friend of mine coached. Same work I've always done. Calling the rental company about tables and chairs, confirming the food order with a local deli that did affordable platters, testing the microphone and the projector, taping down the cord that ran across the floor so nobody tripped on it during the program. I'd been there since 7 a.m., and by the time the first guests started arriving around 10, the room was set up exactly the way it was supposed to be. The event went well. The food was on time because I'd confirmed the delivery window the night before. The seating worked because I'd measured the room and calculated the capacity before ordering the chairs. The program ran without dead spots because I'd printed the schedule and taped it to the podium so the speakers could see it. I spent most of the event in the back, near the kitchen, checking things, adjusting things, solving the small problems that nobody in the audience ever sees, because solving them before they become visible is the whole point. Afterward, when the last guest had left and the rental crew was stacking chairs and breaking down the tables, my friend walked over. He'd been shaking hands and thanking donors for 3 hours straight, and his tie was loosened and his sleeves were rolled up, and he looked like he'd been standing in one place long enough for his feet to hurt. He stood next to me for a second without saying anything, both of us watching the rental crew stack the last of the chairs. Then he said, "Thank you, Jake. Seriously, I couldn't have done this without you." He said it the way people say things they mean but don't think require a ceremony. Casual. Obvious. Like it was the most natural thing in the world to notice what someone did for you and say so out loud. I nodded. Anytime. I drove home with the windows down. The radio was on, something I didn't recognize, and the air was warm and the streetlights were starting to come on in that early evening way where everything turns slightly gold. I didn't think about my family the entire way.